Hey, Kat, how are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm good. Comment ça va?
Très bien, merci.
Parfait. Perfect. Well, guys, I'm so excited for this interview. Kat is amazing. She's lived all over the world, and she is actually the senior Europe editor of Live and Invest Overseas. Anybody heard of Live and Invest Overseas? Put me in the chat. They are one of the top publications of living overseas, and they provide so much good content. I'm a big fan. And basically, let me give you guys a quick intro for Kat so you kind of have a background of, what she's all about. She's grown up around the world, living in the US, Ireland, France, and Panama. And as a young expat, she's really familiar with the ups and downs, okay? And like everything living in a new destination. She loves living through experience, and there's no one place that's home. I think home is
Yeah.
really everywhere for you, right?
Yeah. I get restless if I'm in one place too long, so have to travel.
But her and her husband relocated back to Paris, France in 2018, where
Yep.
they now live full time with their American born. What kind of dog is it?
Doberman. So
Doberman.
my cat was from the US, but my Doberman I got in Panama, and trust me, it's not easy moving with an 80-pound dog. So lots of different experiences.
And a lot of people before had questions about the animals.
I've done it all with animals.
It's possible, guys.
Yeah.
And also her French born daughter.
Yep.
And yeah, so you were the special projects manager of Live and Invest Overseas, right? And now you're the senior Europe editor, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have my hand in a few different things, but mostly I'm writing about living here in Europe and, telling other people how they can make it happen for themselves too. Plus, I do have the experience of living in both Latin America and Europe, and they're very, very different cups of tea. Everybody likes and dislikes different things about every given place. No place is perfect. But Latin America and Europe are definitely two totally different paths going overseas. All of it is a wonderful experience, but I saw lots of people actually have heard of Live and Invest Overseas. So hello to our readers. But yeah, we also give conferences all over the world to help people discover more about the countries that they might like to move to. So virtual summits, talking about all of Europe next week, for example. In November, we'll be having one just in Spain. So, we kind of mix it up a little bit with in-person events in the country to try and introduce people to these countries. And great question, whoever asked it, about how can you tell if you want to live in a place? I totally think of it as a relationship, like as with any other human. There's chemistry that you have with a place, just like you have with people. And you'll wind up in a place and sometimes you just don't like it right off the bat. But in a lot of places, you like them all. And the last guest's advice was great. It was, you've really got to live like a local. You've got to get your feet wet and spend some time there, and that's really the only way to figure it out.
I love that you've added, that comment, but how long would you say you have to stay in a place in order to really grasp it? Because I know we've been talking a little bit about scouting trips, and you guys also encourage scouting and, going and checking for yourself instead of just reading about it. What would you think is like a good timeline for people to spend?
How long is a piece of string? It's as long as you want to spend, really. But what the biggest point I like to make is that it's not a one-way ticket. It's not like jumping off a cliff. You can keep moving. If the first place isn't right, it's not the end of the world. You haven't made a mistake. You've had a great adventure. You can keep moving, or you can go back home. There's no wrong way to do this, and you can tailor it all to whatever feels most comfortable for you. Generally, though, to give a real response, I would say at least a month to get to know a place would really let you dig in. You wouldn't get to know the neighborhoods. You would really be living like a local, and you would really have an idea of what it is to live there. But you can also do that in a week, if you really force yourself to dive in and really integrate immediately. So it's possible to do it kind of on a shorter time span if you're moving around a lot.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much. And how did you start living abroad? I'm so curious.
Well, I was born into it. I didn't have a choice. I moved to Ireland. Well, my family moved to Ireland when I was about 7. But actually I was the one who said I was going to move to Paris when I was 14. So I kind of took up the baton and decided I was going to move to France. I went to high school in France. And actually, when I moved back to the US for university, it was like its own expat experience. I had a total culture shock trying to move back and reintegrate there.
Wow.
Excuse me. So that it's a funny thing how, you know, the United States for me is just as much a foreign country now as any other place. And then, yeah, I continued the journey into Panama when I graduated, but I had always been kind of my goal had always been to move back to France. So I dragged my husband and all my pets over here with us. And exactly when we moved, we got hit with COVID. So, you know, none of this is ever predictable. And you really learn how to be flexible and roll with the punches. The other big point about how, you know, this isn't a one-way ticket and there's always, you can always go back, is that there's always going to be a moment of panic, and it could be a long moment, you know, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could hit you in the first month of living there, it could take a year to hit you. But you will always, I think, have that moment of panic, and you just kind of have to push through it. So it happened to me when I moved to France. I thought, I'll never have that panic again. I am so used to this. I am an old hat. I've done it all. I've been wanting to move back here for years and years. But getting pregnant and then getting hit by COVID, you know, I just was in a tailspin. So you can never predict any of it, what happens when you move overseas. And you kind of just have to keep going. And, you know, if it doesn't work out, you know, you just move on and keep going.
Wow. And I love how you guys though provide so much like support in your community for just so many resources. We actually had a question here. Somebody asked, are there any resources or books you can suggest about living in Spain? I'm sure you guys have whole pages on it.
Yeah, so this is exactly what we do. We provide this kind of information. If you want to check out our website, liveandinvestoverseas.com, there will be a whole section on Spain there with some really great information written usually by expats or our editors, sometimes me. So lots of great stuff for free on the website. And then we do have, like, I think they're €10 or $10, sorry, little reports, and they're all digital. So you'll download a PDF and, you know, it'll be a full issue on certain spots all over Spain. And then of course we do have our conference coming up. If you're really interested in Spain, then that's the best thing. It's the silver bullet. It gives you everything you need in 3 days.
And by the way, Kat's free gift is actually access to a free conference. So I'm going to put that in the chat right now again. So that's really generous of you guys. Thank you so much. And yeah, I will put your guys' website in the link because somebody asked, or in the chat because somebody asked for it. Okay, can we talk about, I know you've lived everywhere and you're obviously the senior editor. What can you kind of talk about, you know, Panama for a little bit? What was it like living there? A lot of Americans yesterday were asking, oh, well, dangerous, like, is it safe? Can you kind of touch on what the life was like living in Panama and Latin America?
Yeah. So first of all, you need to just forget everything that you think you know, especially if the news headlines that you have in your head are from a certain era, you know, the 80s or whatever, about, you know, Panama and being a safe haven for bad people. That was a long time ago. It is a fully integrated first world country at this point, where, you know, the Panama City, the capital, is a massive financial and business hub in the region. It's actually called the hub of the Americas. So not unsafe any more than anywhere else in the world, you know. And I've been mugged. It was in New York, you know. I've not been mugged outside of the United States. So safety is always something that's, you know, people kind of forget that densely populated cities are always going to have a higher crime rate. That's just par for the course. But no, there's nothing inherently unsafe about going, you know, south of the border. I spent a lot of time in Colombia too, which raises a lot of eyebrows with Americans, especially when Narcos came out. But I mean, Pablo Escobar was shot the year I was born. You know, the country has come so far since then. And no, I never felt unsafe unless I was doing, you know, unless you're doing something unsafe. If you're walking down a street by yourself at 3 a.m, texting on your phone, you know, you're a bit of a target. But as long as you're practicing common sense that you would practice in any other place in the world, there's really nothing to be worried about safety wise.
Thank you so much. And I think it's super important also coming from like a woman, you know, I'm sure you solo traveled at that time too. So you've been like everywhere. So I really appreciate that insight. And then what would you say the differences are between, you know, the folks that want to retire or move? You know, there's so many cool visas. I know Panama, you invest like 200K if you're not retiring and you get residency. What do you say to people that are kind of on the fence? They're thinking of Latin America versus EU. What are the main differences?
I actually have an essay exactly about this, about listing the biggest ways for me that they compare to one another. And it comes down to a lot of different things, but for example, organization is kind of the header that you could put over Europe. You know, Europe's been here a long time. They have put their laws in place and regulations in place for a long time. They love their administration, their paperwork. Latin America, think about it a little bit more like the Wild West. Like things have not been regulated for so long, so there's not necessarily as many rules, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. You know, so for example, driving down the street, somebody stops in front of you to have a chat with somebody that they recognize on the corner. That's nice and homey, but in a big city, you know, that's not the way streets work. You can't just stop in the middle of the street to have a chat. And in Latin America, you know, things still work that way, which is very charming and appeals to many people. On the other hand, in Europe, you would get a ticket, you would get honked at, you know, like people would make you move on. So kind of a small example of the way that things can be a little bit more strict, I guess, in Europe versus Latin America. But, you know, also things like litter on the streets, you know, you really don't see much litter in Europe, whereas it's a much bigger problem in Latin America, just to be frank, you know, and yeah, it's just so much, I guess, history, you know, in Europe, there's just so much history here, and Latin America, there is history, but it's all just so much newer. Everything is so much newer feeling. And in a lot of ways, it seems like people are still figuring things out in big cities, for example.
Right. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what about if we shift to EU? I mean, obviously you're a France fan, and we actually have some people in the chat asking some questions specifically about France. Lisa Ann and Lynn want to move to France. Any tips on preparing ahead of time and integrating in France? I mean, and this probably serve for other people that don't want to specifically move to France, but like that integration process. And
start learning the language now, even if it's just doing Duolingo for 5 minutes a day, that will help you immensely. If you can, do classes, do courses, start to immerse yourself in the culture as much as you can by, you know, reading about the news of the place. Even silly things like, you know, reading books that are set in the place or written by a local author. It's actually one of my favorite things to do when I'm traveling. I have a bit of a book club. When I'm traveling, we'll pick a book that's either about the place or by someone from the place. And it really helps you get into the place before you get there. And you feel like you have a little bit of history and knowledge with the place before you get there. You know, it could be taking a cooking class, you know, take a French cooking class, and you just start to get more into things, you know, listen to a French radio station. But in terms of actual preparation, there are a lot of things you're going to have to do before you move on the administration side. I'm guessing that's a different topic. You're talking more about the mental preparation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mental part is the most important, because I'm going to tell you, and I'm sure you would probably say the same thing. Only 10% of people that say they're going to move abroad actually do it. Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think
lots of armchair travelers. Yeah.
It's easy to talk about it and research, but then it's like the action part. What do you have to say? I mean, maybe a combination of the action, the mindset, and then actually, you know, preparing with the action. That's really what I'm wondering. Like, what are the actionable items?
Yeah, I think you just have to push yourself to do it. I don't really like, you can do so many things to prepare, and you can read until you go blind, you know, but in the end, you just have to take the jump and see if it's for you. And again, if it's not a big deal, you know. And I know this is something you mentioned, Shauna, about how, you know, people back home call you crazy. They think that this is the most insane idea and you're out of your mind and you're going to be kidnapped, or, you know, you're going to go poor because of taxes and all these things. all of that can be mitigated. Everything will work out, can be worked out. You just have to figure out if it's for you. And the only way to do that is by living it. There's really no way to prepare yourself for that before you get there.
We could basically come up with so many reasons why not to do it. Oh,
Exactly.
I'm going to have to not have a car. Oh, I'm going to have to rely on public transportation. But the other end of that, like, that's so beautiful. You don't have to pay for all the expenses of having a car. Everything's so easy. You're going to be walking more and exercising. You might not even have to be a part of the gym.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I really think it's also the perspective, like when you hear that negativity, if people don't get why you're doing this, always remember, and also being a part of like a supportive community, attending events like this to kind of like keep that motivation there, especially if like family members aren't okay with it. I think we're both blessed that our family members are open to, travel and living in other places, but not everybody has that.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, from that point of view, I would say it helps to be in a community of like-minded people. So we're already, you've already taken the first step. You're in this community right here of all these people thinking about it. Everybody's talking to one another in the chat bar, and keep doing that. Keep putting yourself out there, keep looking for the people that are in this realm, and try and meet people. I will say though, take social media lightly when it comes to going overseas. There are tons and tons of really great expat resources online. I have made so many of my good friends, and most of my referrals for business and services have come through social media, but they can also be really, really negative, especially if it's a board of people that have been there for 20, 30 years, and all they're talking about is how the place isn't what it used to be. And, the prices are higher than they were 30 years ago. Well, of course they are everywhere in the world, and you can feel like those places can not necessarily always be safe spaces. There can be some trolls and stuff saying things that can be discouraging. So I would say find the good communities that are supportive and positive about the whole thing.
I totally agree. And like yesterday, a speaker was saying the worst, I think Maddie, she closed the summit yesterday. She said, the worst thing you could do is go on the government website and see that it says like, level, whatever the worst level is for Colombia. Because of course, some of those countries, the government's going to tell you, don't go there, but you've had a wonderful experience there, and
Yeah,
it really
well,
is about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Don't judge a place before you get there, basically, and experience it for yourself. But it's funny, on the flip side, I encourage you to go to other countries' governmental websites and see what they say about going to the US, because every other country in the world has massive alerts to their citizens saying the US is one of the most dangerous countries to go to as a tourist. So, I mean, it's, again, perspective, to everyone else in the world, America is also a dangerous place. It's kind of a funny thing.
Sorry, I'm choking.
Are you all right? I was noticing, I couldn't tell if you were laughing or drinking.
I had a sip of this smoothie and it went down the wrong tube. Sorry about that. What I was going to ask you is tell us a little bit more about the live and invest overseas hotspots, like the best places to live.
Well, France is obviously my personal pick, but no, some of our top countries include Panama. Mexico, of course, is very popular. And Mexico is a huge country. People can be a little bit tunnel vision when it comes to Mexico, but Mexico is a massive, wildly diverse country with so many different lifestyles. Panama, the Dominican Republic is a really interesting Caribbean option with some good visa choices. Colombia, as I said, is one of my personal favorites. My family has a home there. We spend time there every year. I think those are probably our top picks in the Americas. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. But in Europe, Portugal obviously is always a big winner. That has been historically our top retirement destination in the world for many years. This year, it actually got edged out a little bit by a Panama destination, but also Spain, of course, Italy, Greece, and then we do get into some of the smaller countries. So Malta, Montenegro, Croatia, Yeah, and I mean, and a smattering of others, but those are probably the top picks. And if, you know, if anybody has any particular interest in any of those, I can expand on them.
Yeah, guys, I mean, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We have a couple more minutes left, but we'd love to take some of your questions. Kirsten asks, Albania, is that one of your guys' top picks for like
It is not. I have been there. It is obviously a very small country. It is in this corner, you know, with Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro up in this little corner of above the Adriatic. And it's I mean, it is very small and not a lot going on there. I actually don't know. Do you know if they have a digital nomad visa? Is that why it's coming up?
I'm not sure if it does. I don't think it does, but let's double check. I can check right now.
So I'm looking at the questions. How can we find out? Oops, they keep going up. How can we find out about local people's opinions of expats from various other countries like US? Well, yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. Basically, how are different nationalities perceived locally, I think is the question. So what do the French think about Americans, for example, if that's correct, if I'm getting the meaning right? There's really no way to tell. Once you're in a place long enough and you start speaking to people, it'll come out. But it's you can't paint with a broad brush when you're talking about this. So for example, you know, there's a big stereotype about how the French view Americans. And that can be true, but also Americans are seen as hands down the friendliest people in the world. We are the big cuddly teddy bears of tourists, of expats, of, you know, people traveling. We like to talk, we're chatty. And so some cultures actually don't like that. So the French, for example, are not chatty people, and they find it to be superficial to be have small talk with somebody in an elevator, for example. So they don't do that. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily unfriendly or you know, judging you for any reason. But then, for example, in the South, Americans or Anglophone tourists would be treated better than a Parisian tourist, because in the south of France, you know, Parisians are seen as the hoity-toities that come down and flash their money for a month and then go back home. And they're definitely not like, I don't know, maybe there's a comparison to a New Yorker going somewhere in America. I don't know, but basically the big city folk are not appreciated, but they love Americans in the South. So, or there's no animosity there at all. So, yeah, I generally, I think that Americans are very much beloved overseas. And in fact, it'll come out when you're overseas more that, hate to say it, but the British tourists actually have a really bad reputation. The Netherlands has actually had a marketing campaign out all spring to discourage British tourists, especially young males. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. That's because I was still coughing. I did check. Yes, Albania does have a digital nomad visa, so that is quite nice. But yeah, I see you guys talking a lot about Montenegro, Portugal, Panama. Those are kind of some of the top ones. There's another question or question/comment. Patricia says, I speak French, but I'm 55, so it seems almost impossible at this point to move. A lot of the paths have age restrictions. I also will agree that nothing is impossible. And then Judy, she did comment here. She said she moved to France at 59 and she's still teaching English at 69. So what do you have to say about the age restriction topic?
Absolutely not. Do not let age be a factor, especially if you already speak the language. That's half the battle, really, especially at a certain age, I think. But in fact, many countries incentivize people past a certain age. So seniors get lots of benefits, lots of, you know, little tax breaks and things. But I've known people who've done this in their 80s, and they say that their only regret is not having done it sooner, basically. I don't actually think that there's any age restriction on the visa. For example, the visa I'm on here in France is it's kind of what we refer to as self-sufficiency visas, where you prove you've got a steady income and you're allowed to live here. You know, you're not going to be a burden to the state because you bring your own money. And as I can't imagine that there would be any age restriction on that for any reason. So in fact, I think it's the opposite. We've had this question before. I think it's the opposite. I think, in fact, there are more benefits to being a senior citizen and moving overseas. You get a lot of extra advantages.
Amazing. I love that. I think the age restriction piece is where you have to look into it is the private health insurance. That is where, you're going to maybe have one or two companies. I know there's like one or two companies in Portugal that are supporting people that are over 72 if you want private healthcare. Same for Panama. So, I mean, that you're going to have to navigate a little bit. But yeah, I've never really heard there being really crazy age restrictions,
Mhm.
Yeah, like you said, the pensionado visa in Panama, which is the retirement, like you have to be retired and over a certain age. So yeah, those are all great. So guys, I mean, we're in the last 5 minutes of our chat, so let's open it up to Q&A. I know we've already answered some questions. Let's see if there's some other ones. Are there any restrictions for non-citizens to invest in Europe in general, Spain in particular?
Nope, not at all. In general, mostly foreigners are treated the same as locals when buying overseas, especially in Europe or Latin America. Asia is the big question mark there. Asia works very, very differently, but there are some restrictions that just apply to everyone. You can't own within a certain meterage of the beach in many countries. You can't buy near military base, but these things generally apply to anyone. So really no restrictions usually.
Awesome. And then there was a question, and then how the chat keeps going down. So I forgot who asked it, but what are some investment opportunities for people in other countries?
There's a wide range. One of the things that we are really excited about in Europe are agricultural investments. So, for example, truffles in Spain. I actually just was on a trip to Spain and saw the truffle farm where I actually invested a few years ago. Almonds is another one. Excuse me. Pre-construction can also be a really good, do your due diligence. Pre-construction can be a great investment. Cyprus is a great place to look for that, where, it's almost pocket change to invest there, and about a 2-year delivery time. We missed somebody's question twice. Oh no.
Yeah, Imran, will you tell us your question again? We want to make sure to get it answered. It's because this chat keeps moving so quick, so sometimes we're missing them. Let's see if Imran can
in the meantime, you mentioned healthcare, and I will just plug, we use a brokerage that I think I can drop you the link after, but we use a brokerage that's based in the United States, and they specialize in travel insurance, which is kind of the big loophole to the age restriction. There's no age restriction for travel insurance, and it can be a really great way to get around age restrictions in other countries.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And then Imran, we're waiting for your question. If you can, please drop it in there. If you see another one that you want to answer, feel free, Kat, while I look for okay, I found Imran's. I asked earlier about moving to Germany or Netherlands. What are the chances to find work over there? I have 10 years plus experience in finance functions.
Honestly, not good. It's way easier to get a job and relocate. I know many people, dozens of people who moved to Germany and the Netherlands, but their companies hired them from other countries and sent them there. It's very difficult, just to be perfectly honest, it's very difficult to get employment overseas. So my biggest tip is always have your employment set up before you go overseas. If you want to, check out the multinationals that exist in both of those countries. Finance is the biggest sector for moving people abroad. In my experience, everyone I know is an accountant or in finance of some kind, banking. So check out the multinationals that are there. Maybe, try and get inroads where you are now and see where it leads. Amazing.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for that. And then I kind of agree with the, finding the remote job that will then, they're okay with you working in another country, because then in Netherlands, all you need is a letter from that company that you work remote for, and they have a digital nomad visa. So you would just need a letter from your employer saying they can work wherever. So that is a little bit easier than having to get sponsored, because then you might have language requirements. It's not impossible though. It's just very difficult.
Exactly. I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I'm so happy that you were here with us. Wait, expat over 70. You answered.
I'm gonna go look for that link and I'll send it to you, Shauna.
Okay, amazing. And I'll put it in a future email.
Great.
I'll note your name, Marge. Well, I wanted to introduce you to Allison, who's our next speaker. She actually lives in Portugal. She runs a really amazing blog, and she actually hosted a summit similar to this one, but it was actually just focused on Portugal. Was it last month, Allison, or 2 months ago?
My brain doesn't want to work. Want to think about the summit since it happened, but it was mid-May. Mid-May was when we did that.
Awesome. Well, I
It
hope
was awesome.
Allison, I think we met in Carvuero in April. You were at
Hey, I know you look so familiar. Yeah, you were. Yes, I was.
You looked familiar as well, and then I heard your name was Allison, and I thought, oh my gosh.
I think you may have handed me the microphone.
I did, yes. Oh, that's my job, the handing off the microphone.
That's funny because now we're handing it off the opposite way. Or no, again, the same way. That's so funny. Well, guys, I put the free conference that Kat is offering for you guys. Very generous. Thank you so much. So just make sure you fill out that form, and then you guys will get access to a free conference. I'll drop it again in there. And Kat, it was so great to have you, and awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking time out of your, I'm sure, busy evening to come on here.
Thanks. It was great to talk to you. Have
Okay,
a great
awesome.
rest of the
Take
day,
care.
everyone.